I don't know what shocked me more. The way his hand landed on my thigh without hesitation, or the way I didn't ask him to move it. We were somewhere outside Moab, Utah, chasing nothing but the horizon and a playlist we both built on a dare. The windows were down, the air was dry, and we hadn't spoken a word in over 15 minutes. But when his fingers slowly curled around the inside of my knee, it said more than anything either of us had been brave enough to say all trip. And suddenly, I couldn't remember why we ever pretended this wasn't coming. We'd been friends for 12 years. Me and Cal. We met in college during freshman orientation, paired together for a group scavenger hunt neither of us cared about. He was loud and magnetic, the kind of guy who made strangers laugh in elevators. I was quieter, the observer type, and somehow that made us click instantly. Over the years, we'd been through breakups, bad apartments, late-night drunken confessions, and long-distance gaps that never broke us. But nothing in those 12 years prepared me for what it felt like to fall asleep in a tent beside him and feel his breath on the back of my neck. Or to watch him change his shirt on the side of a dusty gas station, only to realize I was looking too long. We'd planned the road trip on a whim. 10 days, no plans, just a map, a playlist, and an unspoken hunger for something neither of us could name. He was fresh out of a bad relationship. I had just quit a job that had drained me dry. We needed motion. We needed to run. I just didn't expect to run straight into him. The first few days were easy. Laughing, joking, camping under stars, drinking bad whiskey from plastic cups. But then came the stiller moments, the longer glances, the shared silences that held something between them. Like the way he looked at me when I was brushing my teeth at that remote roadside motel. Or the time our fingers accidentally touched when we both reached for the trail mix. Each moment was small, but each time it lingered. That afternoon in Utah was the turning point. We just climbed out of a canyon hike, legs sore, shirts damp, hearts pounding. We didn't talk much after that, just music and landscape, and then his hand, on my thigh, stayed there, warm, steady. I looked over at him. He didn't look back, just smiled softly and tapped the steering wheel to the beat of the music. And I didn't say a word, because I didn't want it to stop. That night, we set up camp under a sky so full of stars it didn't feel real. He built the fire. I laid out our bags. And when we finally sat shoulder to shoulder in the low flicker of orange light, I could feel something between us cracking open. His thigh pressed against mine. Mine didn't move. He passed me the flask. Our fingers touched. And this time, neither of us looked away. The desert got cold fast. That kind of bone-deep cold that hits you the second the fire dies down, when you've already zipped your jacket halfway and the air starts nipping at your skin. I shivered once, then twice, but didn't want to say anything. We'd made camp late. One of those quiet, rocky clearings just off the dirt road, and the tent was pitched close to the truck, tucked between the cliffs. But the chill wasn't what was keeping me up. It was him, and the memory of his hand on my thigh that afternoon. He looked at me from across the fire, a beer bottle loose in his hand. "You cold?" he asked, like he hadn't just spent the last 2 hours pretending we hadn't crossed some invisible line on that drive. "A little. I've got a solution," he said. He stood up, walked over, and unzipped the tent flap with a quick jerk. "1 bag," he added over his shoulder. "Less gear, more heat. You okay with that?" I didn't answer right away. Just watched him duck inside, his silhouette outlined in the lamplight from the truck's cab. His voice was casual, but I knew him too well. He was testing something. And maybe I was ready to stop pretending I didn't want to fail that test. We slid into the bag from opposite ends. The fabric was warm from the campfire, but not warm enough. I rolled onto my side, facing the canvas wall. Then I felt it, him, behind me, his body inching closer. No rush, no words, just his hand carefully landing on my hip. He didn't move it, didn't pull me in, just rested there and waited. "You okay?" he whispered finally, his breath brushing the back of my neck. "Yeah." A pause. "Want me to stop?" I shook my head. Another pause. "Okay," he said. "Then I'm gonna stay right here. the quiet turned into something electric. His arm curled around me, slow and firm, until I was pulled into the warmth of his chest. His hand splayed gently across my stomach, his thumb grazing just under the hem of my shirt. My body responded before my mind could catch up. My breath hitched, my skin prickled, my back arched into him just a little. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. He kissed the back of my neck. Light, barely there. Then again, lower this time. His hand moved upward, exploring. Not aggressive, not hurried, just intentional. Like he'd been thinking about this for longer than I realized. I turned to face him. Our noses brushed. My hand landed on his chest, felt the fast, nervous thud beneath it. And then he kissed me. Not like a friend. Not like someone unsure. Like a man who had been waiting to know if I'd kiss him back. I did. Hard. Slow. Full of everything we hadn't dared to say. We touched each other like the truth had finally been spoken. Our shirts came off quietly, like fabric didn't deserve to be between us anymore. My hands roamed his arms, his sides, his back. His mouth moved to my throat, his fingers skimming over my ribs, across my lower stomach, trailing the edges of my waistband. And then he slipped lower, his hand guiding gently, his mouth moving down. He looked up once, checking. I nodded. And what followed wasn't about lust, it was about knowing. Knowing each other. Giving. Receiving. Trusting. And in the dark of that canyon night, under a blanket of stars we couldn't name, my best friend made me feel more wanted, more real than I had in years. We didn't speak for a while after. Just laid there, tangled and quiet, our breath slowly sinking, his hand resting over my heart like he needed proof I hadn't disappeared. You okay? He whispered again. Better then. I woke up before the sun. The tent was dim, quiet except for Cal's slow breathing behind me, his arms still draped over my waist like even in sleep he wasn't ready to let go. I stayed still for a long time, eyes open, staring at the canvas above me while everything from the night before played through my mind in slow, vivid detail. The way his lips found mine without hesitation. The way his body curved into mine like we'd done this 100 times before. The way he looked at me, not shocked, not afraid, but relieved. Like I had finally caught up to where he'd been all along. Outside, the sky was just starting to lighten. I slipped out of the sleeping bag carefully, trying not to wake him, and stepped out into the cold dawn. The air was sharp, the desert silent except for the wind rolling over the rock. I stood by the truck, arms crossed, trying to process everything. Because as perfect as it felt, as right, I was still terrified. What if he regretted it? What if this broke the best friendship I'd ever had? What if that kiss was just a moment? The tent rustled. A minute later, Kel emerged barefoot, hair a mess, eyes squinting against the light. Couldn't find you, he mumbled. You were asleep. He stepped closer, arms crossed now too, mirroring me like he always did without meaning to. I didn't dream it, did I? He asked softly. I shook my head. No. He nodded, quiet for a beat. Then said, good. We made coffee on the camp stove, sat side by side on the tailgate, legs dangling, passing the mug back and forth. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. If anything, it felt lighter. Like the thing we'd been dancing around for years had finally landed. I've thought about that night before, he said, not looking at me. Last night? No. I mean, yeah, that too. But more like what it would be like. If something ever happened between us. If you'd ever let me. I turned to him. Why didn't you ever say anything? He laughed, almost embarrassed. Because we were best friends. Because I didn't want to mess it up. Because I thought maybe you only saw me as the guy who knew how to fix your flat tire and pick you up when dates ghosted you. I looked down at his hand resting near mine on the tailgate. I saw you. I just wasn't ready to admit what it meant. We drove for hours that day, across wide, empty highways, through little desert towns and long stretches of nowhere. The radio played low. We didn't speak much. But we touched. A hand on the leg. Fingers brushing across the gearshift. His arm slung over the back of my seat, his thumb absently stroking the back of my neck every time we slowed down. It wasn't sexual. It was close. Intimate in a way I had never known with anyone else. That evening we stopped early, checked into a roadside cabin motel with wood-paneled walls and a tiny fireplace. One queen bed. No hesitation. He kissed me again the second the door closed behind us, this time with less fear and more need. My hands found his waist, his face, his chest, like I was retracing everything from the night before just to be sure it was still real. It was. And when he laid me down again, this time in a bed, not a tent, it wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was intentional. He kissed me like he'd waited long enough. Touched me like he knew what I needed without asking. And again, we gave in. Not for release, but for confirmation that this was ours now. Later, lying on our sides, facing each other, his fingers playing with mine between us, he whispered, "I don't want this to be just a road trip thing." "It's not," I said, and I meant it. There was something about the desert air that made every word feel heavier, every glance linger longer, every silence carry its own kind of meaning. And that evening, as we drove west toward Monument Valley with the windows halfway down and the sun sinking low in the distance, I could feel the weight of everything that had happened between us pressing gently against my chest like a hand that didn't want to hurt me, just make sure I didn't forget it was there. Cal was quiet beside me, one arm resting across the back of the seat, his fingers lightly brushing the back of my neck every now and then like he couldn't quite stop touching me even when he wasn't fully aware he was doing it. It wasn't possessive, it was familiar, and in that familiarity, something inside me softened in a way I hadn't allowed in years. When we pulled into the overlook just before sunset, the sky was painted with every possible shade of orange and rose and fading lavender, the kind of palette that made you forget about everything else in the world, at least for a little while. We got out of the truck without saying a word and leaned against the warm metal of the hood, shoulders barely touching, both of us pretending like we weren't counting the seconds between accidental brushes of skin. "I've been thinking," Cal said finally, his voice low, thoughtful, almost hesitant in a way that felt rare for him. "This trip is going to end soon, and I'm starting to feel like I don't know what to do once we go back." I didn't answer right away because I'd been thinking the same thing since the moment I first woke up with his body pressed to mine. His breath steady on the back of my neck, his hand holding me like he was afraid I might slip away if he didn't anchor me there. "You're not the only one who's thought about that," I said after a long pause, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't know what we are now or what this becomes, but I do know I don't want to go back to pretending this didn't happen." He turned to look at me then, fully and completely, his expression softer than usual, but with that same intensity behind his eyes that had always undone me no matter how much I tried to stay composed. "I've been thinking about you for longer than I should probably admit," he said, his hand reaching out, fingers wrapping gently around mine on the truck hood. "I mean, not just like that night or even this week. I mean for real. Like this, us." There was something in his voice that cracked open something deep inside me. A kind of quiet vulnerability that didn't often come from him. But when it did, it felt like a secret being handed to me wrapped in trust and fear and hope all at once. "I don't know how to do this if we go home and act like none of it mattered," he continued, his thumb moving slowly across the back of my hand. "Because I don't think I could go back to just being your best friend. Not after this. Not after knowing what it feels like to be close to you and have you actually let me in." I didn't speak, because my throat had tightened, and it took me a moment to find words that didn't sound smaller than what I was feeling. So instead, I leaned in, rested my forehead against his, and let our hands clasp tighter between us. When we finally pulled back, he smiled. Not the teasing grin he usually wore when he made fun of my music taste or my terrible sense of direction, but something slower, more tender, the kind of smile that said thank you for hearing me. That night, we booked a last-minute cabin just off the highway. Something small and quiet with one bed and creaky floors and a little gas fireplace that sputtered when you lit it. We didn't speak much once we got inside. There wasn't anything left to say. We'd already said the important things without needing to repeat them. We undressed slowly, not with urgency but with intention, our fingers finding the hems of each other's shirts and lifting fabric away from skin like we were unwrapping something delicate and long-awaited. I ran my hands across his chest, down the ridges of his stomach, memorizing the way he breathed, the way he leaned into my touch like he'd been craving it longer than he'd let on. He kissed me differently this time, deeper, more certain, with a kind of quiet hunger that came from wanting to make a moment last, not just exist. Our bodies moved together, slower than the night before, more connected, more deliberate. His hands moved over me with care and focus, and when he kissed lower, trailing warmth across my chest, down my ribs, and beyond, I felt myself surrender. Not just to the pleasure, but to the trust. I let him take his time, let myself feel his mouth on me in the quiet, reverent way he gave himself to the act, not just physically, but emotionally. He wasn't just trying to please me. He was proving something, that I was worth being wanted this way. After we lay tangled in the soft lamplight, my head on his chest, his hand slowly rubbing circles into my shoulder, neither of us needing to say anything. But I spoke first. "This isn't just a trip anymore," I whispered. Cal kissed the top of my head. "No," he said. "It's the beginning." The next morning didn't feel like waking up in a motel bed hundreds of miles from home. It felt like waking up inside a decision we'd both already made, even if we hadn't said it out loud yet. Cal was still sleeping beside me, arms slung across my stomach, his breath steady and slow, and for a few perfect minutes, I let myself believe this could be our every morning, sunlight leaking through dusty blinds, skin warm against mine. The rhythm of his chest rising and falling like the only clock I needed. I didn't move, not because I didn't want to wake him, but because I didn't want the moment to end, the stillness, the weight of him beside me, the memory of the way he touched me the night before like I was something he'd waited too long to risk rushing. And when he finally stirred, stretching slowly, blinking against the light before rolling toward me with a low, sleepy groan, he looked at me like I was already his, and it was the easiest, most natural thing in the world. "I don't think I've ever felt this relaxed," he said, his voice thick with sleep and something softer, warmer, that didn't need defining just yet. "Usually after I hook up, I wake up feeling like I did something wrong. But this doesn't feel like that." I reached up, ran my fingers through his hair, and let my thumb rest along his jaw where his stubble had grown just enough to scratch lightly against my skin. "That's because it wasn't wrong," I said. "It was us." He kissed me again, not with urgency, not with need, but with a kind of quiet certainty that made my chest ache. There was no rush in it. No searching. Just presence. Just us. We got dressed slowly, moving around each other in the cramped motel room with the kind of unspoken coordination that comes from knowing someone too well to have to choreograph it. He tossed me a clean t-shirt from his bag without asking. I handed him his coffee the way he liked it, no cream, too much sugar. It felt like we were rehearsing for something more permanent. And maybe, in a way, we were. Back on the road, the silence between us was peaceful. The kind that doesn't need to be filled because every glance, every shared smile, every touch of his fingers on the inside of my wrist as he drove already said everything out loud. We didn't talk about what we were doing, not yet. But when he reached across the console and took my hand, lacing our fingers together and holding on like it was the most obvious thing to do, I knew he wasn't pretending anymore. And neither was I. That afternoon, we stopped in a small mountain town, one of those blink-and-you-miss-it places with faded signage and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1973. We sat in a booth by the window, sharing fries and laughing about nothing, and for the first time in years I felt something I hadn't felt since before dating apps and messy breakups and years of second-guessing. Hope. Not for the fantasy of it, but for the real kind, the kind that lives in shared breakfasts and inside jokes and long car rides with someone who reaches for your hand without thinking twice. That night, we checked into a lodge overlooking a quiet lake, the kind of place people went to disappear from their lives for a little while. The room had a fireplace, a view, and one bed again, and this time we didn't hesitate. He undressed me slowly, piece by piece, pressing kisses into each newly revealed patch of skin like he was thanking me for letting him see it. I did the same to him, learning the shape of his shoulders, the way he exhaled when I touched the center of his chest, the way his hands trembled just slightly when he ran them down my spine. We didn't rush. We didn't talk much. We felt. The way he held me as he lay over me, his chest to mine, our mouths finding each other over and over, it wasn't about lust anymore. It was about making this moment something we'd both remember if everything else fell apart. When we moved together, it wasn't for release. It was for reassurance. That we were allowed to have this. That it was real. That we didn't have to go back to pretending we didn't want to wake up like this again and again and again. After, we lay wrapped in blankets, bodies pressed close, the air between us quiet except for the occasional rustle of the sheets and the soft sounds of our breathing sinking again. He reached for my hand in the dark. And when our fingers met, he said, "I think I love you." I didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I just said, "I know. And I think I've loved you longer than I realized." And we didn't need to say anything else. We didn't rush the trip home. After that night by the lake, after whispered, "I love yous," and the kind of closeness that doesn't fade with sleep, we could have easily packed up the truck and sped through the last few miles back to normal life, letting the miles roll by as a buffer between what we had and what we'd soon need to explain. But we didn't. We lingered, took the long routes, pulled off for views that didn't need capturing, just holding. Stopped at diners for pie we didn't want, just to stretch out another hour sitting across from each other in a booth meant for two. We held hands on the road like it was already a habit, like this thing we had wasn't fragile anymore, but forming its own shape, one that didn't need justifying. Somewhere near the border of Arizona and California, he asked the question I'd been avoiding but hoping he'd say first. "What happens when we get back?" He didn't say it with fear, not the kind that stops you, but with the kind of uncertainty that only comes when you care about something too much to leave it unspoken. I looked at him, my hand still in his, and took a breath. "I don't want to go back to how it was," I said slowly. "I don't want to pretend this didn't change everything." Cal kept his eyes on the road, but I saw the tension ease in his shoulders, the way his mouth softened like he was letting himself breathe for the first time in miles. "So we figure it out," he said. And I nodded. Together. Back in the city, things felt louder, faster, less forgiving. The apartment I once thought was comfortably lonely now felt like it was missing something, like it had been waiting to be filled not with noise, but with presence. His laugh, his scent, his stupid habit of leaving half-empty coffee cups on every surface. Cal stayed over that first night, no discussion, no invitation. He just dropped his bag by the door, kicked off his shoes, and made himself at home on my couch like he always had. Only this time, when I walked past him with a towel around my waist and his hoodie still clinging to my shoulders, he reached out, pulled me down, and kissed me without asking. And I kissed him back like we were still somewhere out in the middle of nowhere with no one watching. We didn't tell everyone right away. We didn't need to. Our friends noticed, of course, the glances that lasted too long, the way he leaned into me now without thinking, the way I smiled when he touched the back of my neck like it was just something he was allowed to do now. Some people asked. Some didn't have to. And when we finally said it, yes, we're together, yes, it just happened, no, it's not going away, most people just nodded and said finally. Months passed. We took smaller trips. Not to escape, but to build more moments like that first one, moments that were just ours. Early mornings wrapped in one sleeping bag. Late nights driving nowhere. Holding hands at red lights. Sharing grocery lists. Kissing in the kitchen. Quiet things. The real things. And sometimes late at night, when we're lying in bed and his arm is draped over my chest the same way it was back in Utah, he'll whisper, "I still can't believe that happened." And I always say the same thing. I can. Because sometimes it doesn't take a lifetime to find someone who sees you, it just takes one road trip, one accidental touch, one night under the stars when everything finally stops pretending.